If you love barbecue and you love meatballs, you're gonna wanna stick around because we're making baked barbecue meatballs for dinner tonight. Hey everybody, I'm Susie Weinrich and welcome to Mom's Dinner. Here, we help adults feel successful at dinner time. We're making barbecue meatballs today for dinner, and so where we're gonna start is prepping up the baking sheet that we're gonna bake the meatballs on. You're gonna grab a piece of parchment paper and line a large rimmed baking sheet with that parchment paper. Now at this point we can just set that aside. You're also going to want to preheat your oven to 400 degrees. Now let's get into actually making the meatballs. We're gonna make these meatballs with two different types of meat. We're gonna use a ground beef and we're gonna use a ground pork. When you use a ground beef for meatballs, I always recommend that you use something around an 85-15. That way your meatballs have enough flavor because of the fat content, but they don't have so much fat that they're gonna be greasy. All of our ground meat, maybe not all of them, but most of our ground meat recipes start with something called a panade, which is a mixture of a starch and a liquid to keep your ground meat recipes nice and juicy and tender. So for this recipe, for our barbecue baked meatballs, we're gonna start with just 2 slices of sandwich bread and some milk. You wanna start by tearing the bread into just little tiny bite-sized chunks, little 1/2-inch pieces down into a bowl. Then to those bread pieces, we're gonna add 1/2 cup of milk in this case. Ooh. And then using a fork or a spatula or something, you wanna just kind of mash that bread so that it gets nice and soaked with the milk. And we're just gonna actually set this aside and let it soak and soften while we get some of the other ingredients ready. And here's a little tip about the bread that you use. You really can use any type of bread for your panade here. You just wanna avoid breads that are really seedy or nutty because we don't want seeds and nuts in our barbecue meatballs. While that panade is soaking, we're gonna get a few ingredients ready for the meatballs. And the first thing we need is 1 egg that's just lightly beaten. So I just have it here in this little container and I'm gonna get that just lightly mixed up. Then to this, we're just gonna stir in 1.5 tablespoons of your favorite barbecue sauce. I'm using a little Jack Stack barbecue sauce. I live in the Kansas City area, and so we have a ton of different barbecue sauces to choose from. If you like something more tangy or mustardy, go for that. If you like it sweet and sticky and thick, go for that. If you like it spicy, great. Then we're gonna add 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. This is gonna add a ton of flavor to that panade that will eventually then go into the meatballs. It is one of my favorite ingredients. We're just gonna give that a little stir, and I think our panade is just about ready. So I'm gonna clear the decks here and bring that back in. Our panade looks great. So to that, we're gonna add this little egg and barbecue sauce mixture. Then we're gonna add a few seasonings. We need 2 teaspoons of chili powder and 1/2 teaspoon of smoked paprika. Then we need 1 teaspoon of kosher salt, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, and 1 teaspoon of onion powder. You can see by all of the ingredients that we're adding to this mixture that these meatballs are gonna be super flavorful. So go ahead and give this a nice stir. Now we have this beautiful panade mixture to add the meat to. So we're gonna take 1 pound of the ground beef that we talked about earlier and 1 pound of the ground pork that we talked about earlier. That combination is great for all types of meatballs. I also have an Italian style meatball that's wonderful that uses this combination. I will link that down in the notes for you guys. So using either clean hands or a fork, you just want to start to lightly mix everything together. That looks absolutely perfect. And I know that this is raw meat, but it smells so good already. Okay, now it's time to form the meatballs. So when I form meatballs, this is one of my very favorite kitchen success tips, is to use a little, I don't know, are they called like little cookie scoops to form your meatballs. Here's the other thing. What you wanna do, or this is what I like to do, you know how sometimes you're making meatballs and you making them, they look good, and then you come down and you're like, oh my gosh, I have like 2 tiny little meatballs and the rest of the meatballs are this big. If you do it this way, you're going to have a better outcome of even meatballs. Now, we don't care about even meatballs as far as how they look, right? They're all gonna taste delicious. The thing that matters is that when they are all pretty much uniform in size, they're gonna cook evenly. So you can test 1 or 2 meatballs and know that they're cooked the same all the way across. So you can see that when I'm doing this, I am not forming the meatballs yet, I am just portioning them out. What that does is it allows me at the end, if I have just a little bit of meat left, to add it to some of these before I actually get to rolling them. The other nice thing about these meatballs is that you can make them whatever size you want. So if you want them more dinner sized, you can make them a little bit bigger. If you want them appetizer size, make them a little bit smaller, and then at the end you can stick them with a little toothpick for serving. So you can see that I have a little bit of meat left and I have a full tray. So what I'm gonna do is take this meat and divide it out, just pinch off a little bit and add some to each meatball before I get rolling. All right, we used up all of the meat. It is all gone. Another great tip when you're making meatballs, some people will have you spraying your hands with like nonstick spray, which I find to be terribly messy. But actually, if you just wet your hands a little bit, it makes a great little surface to roll meatballs on, and then the meat doesn't stick to your hands. So let's get to rolling. I like to just take the meatball, like I said, in my wet hands. They're already kind of formed into a little mound, I guess. So they roll up pretty quickly and easily. There we go. There's your meatball. All right, last one. These look really good. And let me count here, 2, 4, 6. 2, 4, 6, we have 24 meatballs. So this recipe should make, depending on what size you're making them, should make anywhere from like 22 to 26 meatballs. And when you're serving them, I usually serve like 2 meatballs per kid and then 3 or 4 meatballs per adult. All right, now for the super yummy part. Before we pop these in the oven, we're gonna baste them all with some barbecue sauce so they get nice and caramelized and glazed and delicious in the oven. Again, I'm just using the same barbecue sauce that I used inside of this recipe, which is just a traditional like Kansas City style barbecue sauce. If you like something a little bit tangier, if you like more of a mustard style barbecue sauce, use whatever you like. So just with a little pastry brush, I like to brush on the barbecue sauce just on all sides of the meatballs. We're using about a cup of barbecue sauce here, and I'm only gonna use about half of it in this first part. And then I'm gonna put these in the oven for 15 minutes at 400 degrees. And then after that 15 minutes, I'm gonna pull them out and I'm gonna baste them one more time, pop them back in the oven for another 10 to 15 minutes, and then they'll be ready to go. These babies are hot out of the oven. They cooked up beautifully, and I actually ended up turning the broiler on just for the last couple minutes to kind of caramelize that barbecue sauce just a little bit. Like I said before, it's great to serve 2 or 3 meatballs to the kids and then 3 or 4 meatballs to the adults. What we like to serve with these is usually either garlic mashed potatoes, which I have a beautiful recipe for. I'll link right in the notes for you. Or we love a crispy cast iron skillet potato. You buy these little tiny potatoes and they crisp up so crispy in a cast iron skillet in the oven. Then we'll usually pair it with like peas or maybe even just green beans. I hope that you make these barbecue baked meatballs for dinner. And if you do, I would love it if you would comment below. Let me know how you liked them, how they turned out for you, and what you served them with. And of course, I hope that this recipe makes you feel like a success at dinner time. So I will see you next week.